So I'm really excited today. We're here at Scarpa North America headquarters in Boulder with Scarpa CEO Kim Miller, and we're here to talk about ski boots. How are you doing today, Kim?
I'm doing great, and thanks for the invitation to sit with you and talk about ski boots. It's one of my favorite topics. And I do want to say that I really love your product. I really love your work, and that's a really big part of the reason why I wanted to do this with you guys. In fact, I brought my copy of the current book
With
and
your name written on it too.
and I wanted to point out that if you have to put your name on it, that means that it's a really it's a hot commodity around the office, and it will be eventually ripped off from you. So that shows how important this is to me. But it's really one of the most comprehensive and well put together publications about not just the product but the sport, the trends in the sport, and bringing it all together, connecting it all together, and really from riders for riders. And I really like that, and it's a joy to read. In fact, my colleagues in Europe, the one of the things they always ask for me to bring over in the fall is the blister, because it is the same to them. So my compliments, and thanks for the work you guys do.
Well, those are very kind words. I feel like I'm blushing.
It's all right. Well, I think it's important to recognize good work when I see it, and we need to work together because the work we do is so important to us, and trying to propagate that and communicate to the world about what we're doing and why we're doing it, how we're doing it. Those are the things that really matter to, I think, a brand like us. You remember, we're a family-owned company. We are still a family-owned company. We've been doing this a long time, and presentation is really important. The quality is really important, but I think that we really put our heart and soul into our products. And you're sitting in a room full of all of our products right now. It's 360 degrees from trail running to ski boots, so you get a real sense of kind of the spectrum that we're trying to make products for the sports, and every one of those categories, people really depend on our products, and not only on the performance but the durability and the comfort. So it's a pleasure and really an honor to be able to do that, especially for the people that use our stuff, and you guys being some of those people. So.
Yeah, well, it's been really fun being in here. You know, I'm typically sample size in shoes, so there's a bunch of stuff I'm tempted to steal walking around here.
I mean, I think you have about 130 opportunities to try
Yeah,
something.
you wouldn't even probably notice it was gone for a few days at least.
I wouldn't for sure, but somebody might.
So one of the unique things about you is your really extensive background in the ski industry. Can you talk a little bit about that background and how that led to your current role as CEO here at Scarpa?
Sure. Yeah, it's you know, snow sports, mountain sports have been my life. It has been the thing that I was most passionate about, and somehow I was able to blend together my passions with my work. And it really started as a retailer and as a guide, and working my way through into having my own shop in Denver. And eventually I sold that business, and I went to work for, at the time, Chenard Equipment. And then I was a founder on the founding team for Black Diamond, and an employee owner, and was there for almost 18 years. And
Wow.
I call it the University of Black Diamond. I did a lot of jobs, and I learned a lot of things there. But it really just, doors kept opening and opportunities kept coming before me, and ones that I really, really thought were important. It's important to me all the time, wanting to figure out a way to be outdoors and practice the things I really enjoyed in the mountains while working on those things. And they really came together when we start talking about skiing and climbing, because I was really active. I'm really active still in the sports. And when you start pulling together in a brand like Scarpa or Black Diamond, trying to make a product line involves so much more than a lot of people probably could imagine. And building good products especially ones that people depend on so much, whether it's climbing gear, whether it's skis or ski boots, bindings. I can tell you that through my career, I can tell you what have been the hardest things to work on and some of the easiest things, but they've all really are parts of the components of the sport and equipment that we love, the sports that we love. So in the snow sports industry specifically, I was a category manager, a sales manager, a sales rep, really all the jobs that rounded me out to probably prepare me to be the CEO of Scarpa North America. I'm always really product centric in a lot of the ways that I look at the world, but that's because I'm a user. And I base a lot of my decisions around my experience and the experience of the people that I'm close to that are also users, very active. And it's a great group of people. The added benefit of all this is the community is phenomenal. I can't imagine a better career, honestly, and a better trajectory for my work and something that I could really contribute to and get a lot out of at the same time. So I have worked on the design team specifically for skis, boots, bindings, every imaginable product to the snow sports industry. And I spent a lot of time around the development teams, the design teams, and in the factories. My particular interest in skiing and focus is, like a lot of people who grew up in Colorado, I started alpine skiing when I was pretty young, but only because a family friend was a doctor who was able to take us skiing, my sister and I, because it's as it is now. It's pretty expensive for a lot of people. It's not necessarily accessible for a lot of people. Through that experience, and because of the economic kind of issues, I became a Nordic skier and a cross-country skier, and eventually a Telemark skier, which was backcountry skiing in the 70s. And my first business was called Telemark Ski and Mountain Sports. My little guide service was Telemark Ski Guides. And that was some of the greatest years of my life and career.
So do you still telly today?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Like what percentage of your days are telly?
Well, I went out the other day with our sales meeting, and I have a strategy here. So I started going uphill. I started on some Skimo boots going uphill, and then I tellied for a while. And then by the time my legs were really getting tired, I was standing up on and skiing around on my heavy metal Mistral XTs and the full kit. And I try to telly is 25% of the time. And the reason that it's so important to not lose that, and I love the community, the vocal minority, as I like to refer to them, and we're still very much in the telemark business. A lot of people. You hear all sorts of comments about what's going on in the telemark business, but I'm looking at the numbers and the sales and talking to the consumers and really trying to be inside looking out. Last year when I tried to do an annual backcountry trip to Canada, a lodge trip, and two of the people on the trip were tele skiers and super good tele skiers and probably people and we're constantly thinking about we think about tele boots as much as we think about AT boots or climbing boots or rock shoes. It's still very much a part of our world, and we realize we take it somewhat as a kind of a responsibility as well, and in the preservation and the evolution of that style of skiing. I still think it's one of the freest, most how would I describe it? Creative kinds of skiing you could have. It's kind of like surfing in a way, longboard surfing. It's a ride that you can't duplicate. Maybe a snowboard if you're a good snowboarder, but it's a really interesting ride and a great turn. And in the right conditions, it's amazing. So, yep, that's still that. Once a tele skier, always a tele skier. I think so.
Well, I've gone tele skiing once in my life. My dad bought a setup years ago, and I stole it from him one day and went to A Basin and was skiing. We were skiing basically like rock hard moguls on like someone else's tele setup, I had an awful time.
It's probably not the way to learn, you know. I think that, but you know, it's interesting because in talking to the tele community, a lot of people, we've come to this, our little group, our little cadre of Telemark skiers and thought leaders, really. We realized that teleskiing is very much alive and well, but it is kind of in a little bit of a dormant state. And part of it is because of the technology that we've brought to it, but part of it is also because we don't have enough. There are not enough access points and resources for education, for demo rental, and things like that. So we're putting a lot more thought into how do we create access. It's been really fun teaching people how to teleski. That was one of my jobs. I was a PSIA instructor at one of my points in my career, and tele as well as alpine and Nordic. And it's really fun to watch people get it. And it is a little bit like surfing in that way, or powder skiing, I think.
Sure.
But it's still an important part of the U.S. Ski and snow sports community and trends, and it's probably been most affected by alpine touring and the efficiency of alpine touring. So Telemark was the way to ski backcountry, and through the evolution of alpine touring equipment, it's become the more efficient model. Plus, most people know how to alpine ski, and teleskiing takes a little more time and commitment to learn, as you were saying.
Yeah.
But it is very accessible, especially with the gear that we have now. But the bindings are evolving very quickly, and that's an interesting trend to watch as we see the norms of 75 millimeter NTN, and now we're seeing this tele-tech kind of norm emerging. So it's kind of leading edge of, I mean, it's the Wild West, honestly, telemark skiing, and that's part of what I love about it. It's really raw passion and innovation that kind of drives it. So stay tuned. It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Well, maybe someday you'll have to take me out and show me how to properly
We'll
surf
get
the
all you
wave.
guys out for a session so we can represent better.
I think that sounds like a plan.
So, you know, my career, to your point, to your question, my career ended me we were the distributors of Scarpa at Black Diamond. And mostly for personal reasons, I wanted to move back home to be with my parents as they grew older and raise my family here. I'm from Colorado. And so I made the big change, which is a tough change to make when you love what you do and where you're working. But I resigned from Black Diamond and I came back to Colorado mostly for family reasons. I became a rep again, which was fun, but probably wasn't, and lucrative, but it wasn't really fulfilling my inner calling to do something bigger and something better. And in 2005, the Perasotto family, the owners of Scarpa, who are friends for many years, approached me about an idea of starting the wholly owned subsidiary for Scarpa in North America instead of using distributors. And they asked me if I would be willing to help them do that and to join forces with them. So in 2006, I did. And actually, January is my anniversary month. So it's almost been 14 years, I guess, 13 years. So it's my career, but it's also something that I consider part of my life, and in a really good way. So I've worked with Scarpa for almost 30 years now, which seems like it really flew by. Probably the most significant thing about that length of career in a focused area like the snow sports industry is I think of Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, and this rule of the 10,000 hour rule. And at a certain point, just exposure to things, to the evolution of a sport. When I started telemark skiing in high school in the 70s, the people that I was really paying attention to and skiing in the backcountry really were, Lou Dawson was a very influential person. Paul Raymer was very influential. the great Telemark skiers, especially the local people, Artie Burrows, and I was in awe of these guys. And I was a few years younger than them, and luckily they allowed me to hang out with them and absorb their awesomeness, but and they instilled a set of values in me that is some people might and certain sensibilities that some people might kind of consider old school now, but whatever it was you were sliding on snow, it was all relevant. And the best athletes, snow sports athletes, could pick any tool out of the quiver, from Nordic skis to a snowboard, and ride them. And I just thought that was brilliant. But where it all came together for me, just like in climbing with alpinism, in skiing it was backcountry skiing. That was the place where I realized this will take every skill I've ever learned and ones that I haven't learned yet. And it became a nirvana for me. You know, it still is. My week-long ski trip to a lodge, some undisclosed lodge somewhere in the British Columbia or wherever it is, it's sacrosanct to me. It's really important. Even though I'm skiing for fun with the people I want to be around, I'm always thinking about it, working and product and everything else. My best day is great friends, great place, great snow. I'm That's really, kind of the best place I can think of being at any given time. So, yeah, that's kind of a quick run through my career, I guess. There's such a thing.
Well, I think we could probably talk about that for a full hour on its own.
Yeah.
Because I've got plenty of questions, but we have to talk about ski boots.
Talk about ski boots. Let's do that.
First, though, in addition to your success professionally and in the ski industry, you're a pretty accomplished mountain person in your own right. Without going too much into this, do you want to maybe pick out one or two moments or objectives or accomplishments that really stand out for you in the mountains?
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd love to. And the first things that come to my mind are some of the first trips that I took to special places. One of the most important trips to me was when we were in the early 80s. We wanted to make a traverse from the Front Range, from Eldora ski area to Vail. We wanted to show that it was possible to do essentially a Colorado high route. A lot of people had tried to do it, but nobody had actually linked it together successfully. And most people were trying to do it on, heavy alpine touring gear. And we came up with this theory: if we had lighter weight Telemark gear and we could tour faster, because there's a lot of high alpine terrain that's relatively flat. Anyhow, that trip we call it the Colorado Grand Tour. I ended up doing it with Glenn Randall, Peter Metcalf, Roanne Miller, and myself. 7 days, 100+ miles. We crashed on our friends' floors in every one of the ski towns. That was a trip. That was a great adventure. Trips to me that are most memorable were the adventures and, again, the people I was doing it with. But it was also a breakthrough to show that you could actually do that. And this is when Berthoud Pass still had a ski area on top. That was a great moment. I think the other trips that really stick out in my mind are my first ski expedition to Alaska. That's pretty daunting, getting off a plane and looking at 7,000 feet of vertical and feeling really small and insignificant. Those were come to Jesus moments. The other thing that pops in my mind when you ask that question wasn't a great day, actually. It was one of those days you really hope you never have. And it was a day that myself and a huge group of my friends got caught in a massive avalanche event in Canada. Yeah, I have to say that day changed me forever, and it made me a lot more aware of what I was doing and the risks that were inherent to that. And it was part of my maturation, as just like in climbing, coming close to that. I would say the greatest accomplishment I have is, like a lot of us at this point in our lives, is staying safe. And I think that's something that everybody needs to really think about all the time, and no matter where you are in your career. Because if you let your guard down for a minute, There's a lot of things out there that can get you. And the backcountry skiing is definitely one of those things. So being safe, I always tell my friends, have fun, try hard, be safe. Those are the rules of the
Yeah.
road for me.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's great wisdom, especially, uh, yeah. I don't know if you were out this past weekend skiing. So much snow for those
yeah,
folks who weren't on the Front Range of Colorado. It was amazing. Um, and a lot of people were skiing very safe. And then, I saw some close calls on Sunday specifically that were like, wow. Um, I really wish that person hadn't made that decision and put, a large group of people in danger. So,
yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting, very interesting topic and a really important one. But I think that there's a responsibility we all have to accept if we're going to be backcountry skiers, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us, and understanding that if you get in trouble because of the ethics that we all practice, and other people are going to come to help. And then it's not just about you. It's definitely not. And it's a silly way to go. I mean, I really think that learning the protocol and learning the basic rules of the road, it's really important. And I'm I always every time I leave here on a Friday night, because everybody here is into skiing and climbing, I always tell people just really be careful this weekend. And that Friday night last week said, pay attention to what you're doing. I've been there to the places you're talking about. I know those hills. I know those particular avalanche runs, and this is the worst condition. Heavy snow, lots of wind. Right now, Friday night, it was high at above tree line, high at tree line, and considerable below tree line. And those are the warning signs you can't ignore. So
Yeah.
that's good. It's always good to keep it real, really important. So it's all fun until it's not anymore. And that moment can happen really fast without warning. So
Well, and for me, that kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier about how backcountry skiing captured you. And a lot of that is this is going to take every bit of skill that I have and some that I don't. And that's not skiing skill. It's not
no.
how good you can get down the mountain. A lot of that is like self restraint, like knowing yourself, willing to be able to say, like, I know I'm going to want so badly to do X, Y, and Z, but to be able to
Yeah.
do all those different things, the knowledge, the human factor, the skill, the like technical skill, all of that comes together, and it's really makes the sport kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think two words I think of a lot: self-awareness and self-discipline, and then being just the situational awareness you really need to have out there, and live to ski another day. It's hard to look down a perfect run of powder with no tracks in it. At that moment is when your judgment is probably most taxed,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
need to keep that real. And we've all been there so many times. So I've had so many experiences that I could share with you, and those experiences are what taught me. Sometimes it's just better to take the handrail down and wait for the next one. And we're really, we were going to talk about ski boots, but one last point on this, that because again, talking about ski boots, we sell a lot of ski boots. Who are we selling to? We're selling to a lot of people that backcountry skiing is pretty new. It's really an aspirational sport for them, and I'm so happy for that and so supportive. So, like getting a new car, learn how to drive it and how it works and how to work it in bad conditions, and that'll serve you well in the long run. But yeah,
So with that, let's
ski
talk
boots.
ski
Let's
boots.
talk ski boots. All right, ski boots. Well, let me give you the overarching kind of my high level on ski boots. This is kind of what I've come to realize over a lot of years of working around footwear, but specifically ski boots. Ski boots are the only thing that your body actually comes in contact with in your ski system. First thing to remember, the comfort and interface of your feet to your ski boots are one of the most important things. Sure, you got your gloves and your helmet and the grips of your poles, but most skiers, especially professionals, when they get on a plane, they have their ski boots with them because they know if my ski boots get separated from me, I'm in trouble because I can kind of fake the rest of the stuff and put a kit back together, but my boots are really personalized. The second thing I'd say is boots are part of a very important system of three components: a boot, a ski, and a binding. And a lot of focus when you're building a system has to be on that boot binding interface, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure, later. So, and I think that investing in boots is, and I'm not saying this because we make boots, but it's really an important piece of equipment to focus on for the reasons I just mentioned. And that you'll know if you have a bad boot or good boot fit very early on. And as soon as you slide that thing on and take a couple runs. So take the time to really get a good fit, do the research on boots. It's worth it. That's why I love your work so much, because you really go into the depth about those details: fitting the boot, taking care of the boot, the differences in boots. But we make boots for as defined by a lot of ski boot manufacturers. We try to focus on a pretty narrow set of categories, and some almost bohemian, like telemarking, but which I love. I love to make fun of it because I am one of those people. And but specifically to backcountry, alpine touring, ski-mo, light touring, whatever you want to call it, that's where our heads are really at. And obviously, we're looking at the bigger world. We're looking at the trends across all alpine, but one of the hardest things to do in business, especially when you're trying to be a really high-end specialized brand, is to pick your battles really carefully. And you'll probably end up spending more time thinking about what not to do than what you should do, because if you're really in tune to what your main focus in work and in product, what you should be doing is almost intuitive. If you're really paying attention to the sports, let the sports guide you. Let the trends, let the users guide you. And then try to work technology around that, solving their challenges, their problems, their wants and needs. And then sometimes you just got to come completely out of left field and say, we've got this crazy idea and I think you're going to love it. The original F1 bellowed AT boot really began the rage. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging here, but I just need to note the first plastic Telemark boot, some of the first original alpine touring boots, the ski walk functions, the experimenting and developing new materials, working on the ski-mo trends, and really putting a bellows in an alpine touring boot, putting a bellows, making a boot like the NTN boots that at one time was what we thought was the one world, one boot solution. You could have a Telemark boot that could work in an alpine touring boot. Little did we know what we were creating there. But one thing leads to another, and being out on that leading edge is it's a big responsibility. It's kind of scary when you're really trying to do new things. The joke we have in the industry, and all my colleagues out there, all our competitors, we're very good friends. I should say that. Really great friends, which makes this even better. Very collegial group. And yes, we're fierce competitors, but when we need to be, but we're really quite tight. And I really like that as well. But when we first started doing some of these projects and people were coming out with their versions of it, and the old joke is there's two kinds of R&D, the research and development and the rip off and duplicate. And we run and compete with really the most best brands in the world. And so we make each other better. And that's like good competitors, ski racers or whatever. You have to train with other people that are as good or better than you to keep getting better. And so I really respect that. And I was on the board of SIA for 9 years, which I was one of the few kind of outdoor backcountry guys, one of the early members from that segment of the industry. And I learned so much from those guys. I really did, from the pure play alpine guys and how they did things and what they did. And I think we learned a lot from each other. And little did we know at that time that they would be, you know, looking at this side of the market, of the industry, and of the sport, backcountry, because this is really where a lot of the excitement is right now. I think even if it's in area kind of backcountry style skiing, or however you want to say it, like you know, Whistler has a lot of that. You know, you can go to A Basin. I mean, you can be backcountry skiing inbounds, and we saw some inbounds avalanches this last weekend. So it's the only distinction is there's a rope splitting down a hill, and doesn't make it any safer because you're on one side of the rope or the other. So backcountry skills are useful for everybody. And a lot of people wear their beacons and air packs in inbounds now on a big day, which is totally legitimate. You know, skiing off the tram in Jackson on a big day, you want your beacon and your pack on, right? That's just standard operating procedure these days. So, so we really focus on the AT market and trying to see where that's going. I would say our premier family of boots and the number one leading boots in the North American market, the Mistral XT family, those have been a really great success for us and have become almost iconic in a way through the generations, the different generations of Mistral XT family. We keep kind of expanding from the core epicenter of that line. That family of boots in particular has such a great ability to cross over and serve a lot of different skiers' needs that it's the perfect one boot, one world AT boot. And then a lot of people, like skis, a lot of people are building 2 and 3 quivers now. So I've got my ski mode quiver, I've got my light touring quiver, or some variation of this. I have my Pure Play Canada backcountry quiver, and then I have my Big Mountain backcountry quiver. Again, watching what the sport people are doing and saying, well, we need to have a boot for every one of those people. Sometimes we can make one boot that'll cross over. There's always overlap. But the other thing about specialty products is something that does everything usually does it everything okay, but nothing super great. And I think that we really, I don't want to sound like we just want to sell you more boots, but we realize that if you want speed and agility uphill, and you're willing to sacrifice the downhill performance for that to some degree, it's like this. I call it the continuum of compromise. So you want a really super powerful Mistral XT, heavy metal, full ride. It's not as light. That's the compromise on that end. You want to use an F1 instead. You're going to lose power for sure, but you'll gain efficiency through the lower weight boot. You know, the Mistral XT is 1,490 grams, and the F1 is 1,260 grams. The difference in those is really just ounces, but when you put it on and go skiing in it, as you know,
oh yeah, it's a big
it's
difference.
Like two different worlds. So
well, that brings up a really interesting point. We've talked a lot in the past few weeks on this podcast specifically about this idea of a one boot quiver. You know, we recently put out all these ski quiver articles where each of our reviewers gets to say like, this is my 1 ski quiver, this is my 2 ski quiver, this is my the personal quivers. But we got a bunch of reader questions asking about boot quivers, and the like overarching idea is it possible to have a one boot quiver that can go and go uphill really efficiently, but also charge in the resort? And I think I'm kind of on your side. I think that there's just compromises that are always made, and if you're willing to make compromises on both ends, you can get in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the one boot quiver.
I think there's a lot of great comparatives to that, but I think that you'll compromise at some point. And it's the same way that you would look at your binding and your ski. Coming back to the system concept, I wouldn't expect that, who would try to ski on a shift uphill for their lightweight binding or a kingpin or something like that. But those guys are ripping when they're going downhill. And I think that and they're probably getting an added element of security, as the Swiss say, out of their binding systems because of the sophistication of those systems. But we're seeing a lot more sophistication in Pentec bindings that aren't a rail style binding. I won't get into brand naming here, but you see it all over. And I'd like to be binding agnostic and really accept every binding and fit every binding, because we make the boots. We want to be compatible with everything out there, unless it's just so far out there that it's not really represented as a legitimate system yet, which a lot of bindings start as, actually.
Sure. Yeah.
But the first touring binding I had, you may never have heard of it. It was called a Marker M Tour. It wasn't a touring binding, but you need to get on and Google some of these things. I see it on Raymer bindings, Emery bindings, Petzl bindings. Everybody who made a binding, I used it. Some of those companies survived through that AT explosion. They were almost all European. But now we have some really solid bindings out there and a large variety. So again, looking at what people are doing in other categories, skis and bindings. I'll use another analogy. If you want a Porsche, get a Porsche. If you want a Ford F-250, get a Ford F-250, and forget about one of them being any good at what the other one's good at. Extreme version, but if you look at the standard compromise in vehicles, it's the American version of the SUV. And now you've got sportier versions of the SUV, like a Porsche version, but they're still fundamentally an SUV. And I think we can expand that, we can morph it out, and we can spread it out a little farther to cover more ground. But there's going to be a continuum of performance compromise at some point. And somebody out there, especially the cognoscente, as we say, will call you out on that. It's like, you call this a lightweight boot? We get the same kind of... it's not an exact science. And what we'd like to do is let people customize as much as they can. The other thing is, what some people consider... I see a lot of people touring in really big, heavy gear. That's their choice. And they consider that their touring setup. A 115, 120 underfoot, really fat ski. Some of my favorite testers, none of them ski on Pentec bindings unless it's something that comes out of the Marker family, and they're really looking at those kind of bindings for the ski performance, because let's face it, a standard touring binding is not an alpine performance binding. And you'll really notice that when you start putting on 125 or 130 flex touring boots. You see the difference. You feel the difference. I think the XT is, well, the whole family of boots that we make, we're trying to give people some latitude, some range of use application. Unless you start talking about Alien 3.0s, those are made for one thing and one thing only. And if you want a 700-gram boot and you want it to be all carbon, but again, I think about mountain bikes. I think about bicycles. I got road bikes. I got cruisers now. I got gravel bikes. I got fat tire winter bikes and my downhill bike. There's nothing general about any of those. So the farther you want to take the performance level in a specific category, the more specialized you're going to have to get in the gear. That's for sure. We always would like to say that we have a boot for those people that want one boot, and most people start there. Interestingly enough, a lot of people start and then they pick up another boot. Our research shows that most people who own a Scarpa ski boot own more than one style of Scarpa ski boot, which is an interesting data point. That's just showing that they're looking at, and it's sometimes very far apart. I have an Alien and a Mistral. That's a Mistral RS. That's a very common combination. And I'm going uphill. I'm going to Eldora in the morning to get my fitness training in. which I would be riding my bike if it was summer, but I just want to burn uphill as fast as I can in really tight clothes or whatever they're into. And then on the powder day weekend, it's like I'm going to put on the heavy metal and go out and, shroud some deep snow and totally different setup. So I love that part of it just because I'm really into the products, and we are seeing emerging categories, though. I think that's really important to mention as we talk about kind of the more classic core boots of the Mistral XT family, and then you look at something like the Alien. We're seeing an emerging category, and I think it's pretty obvious in the market, in this mid-weight, just like we did in mid-fat skis. It's kind of the mid-weight boot that tours and moves and has a lot of agility, lots of range of motion, lots of pretty fast in the uphill. But when you really crank it all down, it's skiing down pretty well.
So what kind of weight range do you see in that mid-weight boot?
That's anywhere from, well, the F1 is a great example of what that is. And then I'll show you. If you didn't notice, I have a little gift for you guys on the wall up there.
I was eyeing it.
That's because it's Christmas time and it's holiday season, and so to that discussion, we're continuing to develop into that mid range, and that is a really interesting category. I think you guys coined one of the best quotes I read in the last couple of years about the Alien RS. This is a really kind of unique and amazing boot, what it's capable of. How can a boot that is 990 grams put out that kind of power and control? It's a great question. I mean, we designed that boot to do exactly that because, frankly, we were seeing our Skimo racing boots just getting destroyed, and carbon by itself is not durable. It's just like your carbon bike frame. You have to be really careful. Hopefully you're not scraping your carbon bike frame against rocks and sharp ski edges all day, but that's what happens to pure carbon boots, especially Skimo boots. So, going to the Grilamid long fiber technology, the Grilamid with impregnated and infused with long fibers of carbon, really changed the game for us because we could get a boot that was much more durable than pure play carbon, and it got really stiff and made it a lot better for skiing. It's pretty unique to kind of certain areas of geographic areas where people tend to ski lighter boots and fat skis, the Wasatch, the Colorado, BC, where you really see that light, fluffy snow, and you can do things that you wouldn't probably be able to pull off in other parts of the world where the more maritime climates. So,
sure, yeah.
It seems like the adaptation and the evolution is faster than I've ever seen it before. And a lot of that creativity is coming from the users, what they're putting together and what they're we used to call it the whack and dangle part of R&D, where it's just like, let's just take a box of parts and make something and see if it works. Perfected in the Telemark world. But for sure, that's how we got to a lot of the Alpine touring binding setups that we are looking at now. And look how many Alpine binding companies and boot companies are now making products for the backcountry. Yeah, I'm going to call it backcountry because I don't know why else you would need a tech fitting in your Alpine boot if you weren't going to use it. So we've called it a lot of different things, but that kind of, I don't particularly like the term side country, but just kind of the backcountry free ride, the people that are skiing big lines and need really Alpine performance, but still need to boot around or ride a machine or get in and out of a helicopter. Yeah, those are the people we're really trying to speak to and make good products for. So
yeah, cool. So let's talk about some specific boots.
Sure.
Selfishly, I want to start talking about the Mistral XT because I've been getting a lot of time on that boot in the past few months and have a lot of opinions on it. Overall, I'm really impressed by it. But first, let's talk about sort of where the XT fits in the line, why it exists, and a bit on the development process of that boot.
Okay, yeah. It's a pretty simple answer. The XT is the extension of the Mistral family, and it really was born in the from the idea that people need more, want more than the Mistral RS is giving them right now. More meaning more stiffness, maybe a little more just general power, lateral as well as driving power. And I think that the simple changes that we were relatively simple in terms of designing ski boots that we were able to make, some people might describe it as a turbocharged Mistral RS, but it is pretty significantly different. If you've skied the Mistral RS, it's not incremental. It's a noticeable step up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad to hear because
yeah.
your opinion matters to me, and my opinion is just one. And it's really easy to get wrapped up in your own ideas here. So listening is really important. If you're trying to do really good design work and development work, listening is the first and most important step to that, and observing. So I've spent a lot of time out observing. I always ask people about their boots. They always wonder why I'm asking them.
Who is this crazy
If you
person?
get on a chairlift with me or in a tram, and you have any kind of a AT boot or anything close to that on, you're gonna get questions from me because I just love hearing, from the users themselves, and it's awesome. So in your case, especially the informed and expert users, the boot was an extension of the Mistral RS. The idea was simply to bring more power to it. We looked at and understanding that, okay, Mistral RS is 1450 grams, and a 125 flex. The Mistral XT, my sales guys would hate it if they heard me trying to recite these numbers. I think I'm right on this. The Mistral XT is 1490 grams, 130. Dav actually called it 130 plus. Which
I would call it 130 plus also.
Oh, that's great because a whole sidebar on flex ratings, nerve-wracking, super nerve-wracking because everybody's so critical of it, and the disclaimer is we're just trying to give you relative sense of flex differences between our boots and our line.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in ski boots. I am not an expert alpine racer, but I know a lot of them, and so I spread the boots around and I get consensus. So, and we also think that rating an AT boot with a ski walk mechanism, it's not exactly like a full plug alpine race boot. So I'm glad to hear that though, because these are the real important data points that substantiate my estimations of these things, our estimations of these things. But by changing the cuff configuration pretty significantly, if you've looked at the cuff, you'll see that it has it covers much more of the front of the leg. It comes down lower, which changes the flex a lot. Using, of course, the Grillamid LFT, and filling in the vents of the cuff that were on the Mistral RS, adding a more powerful closure system at the top with the power strap configuration that we have. Those little things, God is in the details. So people say just make it stiffer, put more material in it, make the wall thickness more, and you'll get what you want. Yeah, but we'll gain another 200, 300 grams. So we got one thing, but we lost our most important thing. The priority was lightweight, agility, functionality in the backcountry, which means range of motion, walking around, booting around. Not just high performance skiers enjoy those boots. Workers, so many people that I call them workers because I was a worker, ski patrolmen, snowmakers, hosts and concerts at the ski area, they love these boots because, why? Ski walk mechanism, lug sole, walking around, warm, comfortable. But a lot of that crowd, once they strapped them down and kicked into their bindings and started skiing, they're like, this is like a real ski boot. I think it rivals, although different, what we were trying to achieve in the Freedom SL. It's really very similar. Very different configuration of boot, different sole norm, all those things, but the feel and the performance of the boot. The other thing I would note that is a characteristic of a lot of our boots and is part of built into the design brief and parameters of this boot is we feel like in the kind of terrain we ski in a lot in the backcountry, which sometimes requires slow speed initiation, really technical terrain, places where you really need to feel everything. No fall zones where you might be cramponing, you might be booting around, walking across a little ledge or something. We really feel that it's important to maintain sensitivity in the boot, to maintain that progressive flex for shock absorption and terrain absorption and general comfort. And so the idea is that we put around a dual density cuff, for example. That was so not to make the boot stiffer, it actually to let it remain, have some movement in there, so you could have that progressive flex, so you could apply acceleration or reduce acceleration just very subtly, like feathering your boot more sensitivity. And then the particular power strap configuration we put on there, when you strap it all down and pull it pretty tight, it's, full on power strap. But it has a quick release buckle on it, and it has the booster feature of elastic, so that it allows in hard landing or an abrupt moment of transition a little bit of extra. We call it progressive flex. So you're working with the boot more, and it's very similar to how you'd want your hiking boot to feel or your ice climbing boot. It also gives rebound to the boot. So it's giving back to you, a good bike and a nice kayak, a good ski. You load energy in and it gives you something back. And it's kind of this exchange, this circular exchange of power in, power out. And you start getting in that rhythm, and that really becomes your turning rhythm in a lot of ways. So I think it's a brilliant boot, but I think all our boots are pretty good like that. But I really appreciate your feedback, because, the thing that I get a lot, again, from you and then a lot of the other reviewers is real honest feedback from skiers. And a lot of them take it offline and say, I'm really not kidding. I really like this boot. It's one of my go-to boots. So a lot of boot choices out there. I think that if we charged in headlong into the alpine boot business, we would not be in our comfort zone. We try to think about things in a different way. We should be. We're making a specialized set of boots here, but weight is a really big deal. We all know how important that is. Warmth is a really big deal. Walkability and range of motion is a really big deal. Those are not the same criteria that you put in a good crossover alpine boot. Even one with tech fittings and one that you could boot around in. There's some really great boots out there by great companies right now. So if you're a consumer, you should be stoked. You have so many great choices. Focus on the fit. Remember to know what kind of system you're going to use before you go in to buy boots, because that has a huge bearing on the boot that you want to choose for the system.
Yeah, well, and it's really interesting. So the XT compared to the RS, I've skied the RS a ton. I probably have, 150 days in that boot, and it is my go-to, mostly because it fits my foot really well, but also the ski performance combined with the weight and the range of motion. And I'm a huge fan. So getting in the XT was it felt a little weird for me, because it was like, man, this RS is so good. Like, I really hope they didn't screw anything up. And
we all hope that.
And the funny thing is, so one of the first things I noticed when I put it on is that there's a little bit, the tongue and the overlap and the closure in the upper part of the boot is a little bit more intuitive than on the RS. The RS, there's this kind of a bunch of little plastic pieces that you got to fold in just the right way, and there's still a little bit of that on the XT, but it's more intuitive in that sense. So I really did appreciate that. But the biggest thing that you notice going boot to boot is that power strap.
Yeah.
The power strap on the XT is really unique, and especially in the market, there's not many people putting booster straps, style straps on, especially touring boots. And then when you add that quick release mechanism that's on the XT, I think it really makes the power strap stand out, especially for people who want that really strong flex with that that kind of progressive booster strap kind of feel. Can you talk a little bit about the motivation behind that power strap and a little bit of the design process?
It was an extension of an idea. These things are so funny. When you ask about, you really want to know, we are constantly trying crazy new ideas. And the booster wasn't a new idea. The idea of adding elasticity to the strap was not a new idea. What we realized in testing it early on, and having the cam buckle was not a new idea. What we realized, and that was all fine. We were ready to go. In fact, the sample that I think is on the wall has the original buckle from the prototypes. I have one in the room here that has the current production buckle with the hook, so you can release it. We just figured out when we were in the field, everybody knows what a pain it is to try to deal with your boots when you're adjusting them, especially with gloves on and things like that. We wanted to make it possible that you could take the strap, disconnect the strap completely without having to thread the buckle, unthread the buckle. Just functionality. And those are the things that would take you or most of your friends 5 minutes to figure out in the field. But that's trying to take the extra amount of time to pay attention to the real details of use. Like, what are the things that become honestly a pain in the bottom when you're out there in the field? And that's one of the things, adjusting your boots. We user interface, as we would say, I think, but we wanted it to give you the full comfort range for touring and really booting around. But when you needed to lock and load, you could pull everything down and feel like you were skiing a 130 boot and get the response that you would expect out of that kind of boot. Again, the hook added a little bit in terms of weight. It's always that compromise, but minimal compared to the functional advantage, we thought. And for that kind of skier, okay, there's not a light setup. They're not using a light setup. It's pretty heavy-duty gear. The other thing that is worth mentioning on the XT is that two other things that you might have noticed in the boot. There are actually 3 different types of liners in the Maestrale family. The ride liner, which is only used in the XT, which is a little higher performance liner. Then we have the performance liner, which is the Mistral RS and Zepa RS. And then the tour liner, which is the Mistral and Zepa. And those are suited to mostly stiffness and volume differences, comfort for the tour all day. Sure, comfort. But the big difference is that we added a Zepa, a boot board, a very thin layer of foam into the XT, which you may or may not have noticed. But if you noticed that the volume felt a little tighter instead of more like a 99 or a 100 last, not a 101.
That was actually another question I have, is because it does feel, especially in the forefoot and instep, more precise, smaller volume for sure.
It's due in part to the liner and to the Zepa. We call it the Zepa, the boot board. And actually, if I may just reach down here.
Yeah. So for those of you listening to this podcast, you're not seeing Kim hold up
this,
the boot.
This is the sound of a Zepa falling out of the boot. So inside is this added little layer, which we call the boot board. And
so this is a pretty hard plastic, couple millimeters thick.
It's thermoplastic. And it mostly is to take up volume. And then if you were very specific about the ramp angle that you like, or if you needed to cant your boot, this allows a boot fitter a platform to do adjustments on. So an expectation when you get into higher performance boots and users that they would like to have that ability. So that's the other difference, and probably one of the most unnoticed differences. But how it feels to you is what I really go on. We get wrapped up in the technology all the time, and that's when I want to say, I think it's time to go skiing. Just put it on and go skiing. And by the way, if you're out testing boots this year and you want another little tester's tip, don't try too many new things at once. If you're going to test new boots, go on a ski and binding that you're really familiar with, because everything, a new ski, a new binding, they all have different feeling, different characteristics. If you set up on a new boot, a new binding, and a new ski, you're not going to know exactly what you're feeling. So go with what you know on two of the three components. Try to stick with only one new thing in your demo testing, and it'll make it a lot easier to isolate where you're feeling the differences and what you're feeling, actually. Just a ski tester's tip.
Yeah, no, the engineer in me pounds that drum all the time. If you change more than one variable, there's no knowing.
It's information overload at some point, sensory overload actually, because it's more feeling.
See, but it's funny. I'd like to get your thoughts on this because I've been skiing the boot, and I'm not that big of a guy. I'm like about 145 pounds. And I really, really like the flex on the RS. One of my favorite things about it is that I can adjust it pretty easily to be pretty soft if I want it, and also crank it down when you need it to be cranked down. The XT is really stiff. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of boot, and the first few days I took it out, I realized that I wasn't really even cranking down the power strap at all because I didn't need that extra bit. So before last week, I took the power strap off of it. By the way, it weighs about 80 grams, 79.2 grams.
That's a pair?
No, that's for
just one.
That's
yeah,
for one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually didn't have that number in my head. Good to know.
And so I skied it all without the power strap last weekend. And without the power strap, it's almost the same weight as a Mistral RS, and definitely stiffer. And I've been really liking it without the power strap. Do you guys do anything like that?
All the time. All the time. I mean, if you walked in my office right now, you'd see I'd actually tried to clean it up a little bit before you guys got here. Doesn't look like a CEO's office. It looks like a ski boot design team office because there's parts and pieces laying all over the place. And that's what I do in my spare time when I'm sick of typing on my computer. I play around in the workshop. And I spend a lot of time in the workshop where I showed you in the distribution center where we just were, because that's where my creative juices start flowing. And I make these, we refer to as Franken boots, taking things that are various parts and seeing what it feels like. And I have a great crew of colleagues here that are all in about taking out strange looking anomalies and testing them.
So I'm sure then that you've already done the thing that I was going to say
No power
next,
straps.
which is put the power strap from the XT onto the RS. Because that's the next thing I'm going to do.
Yeah, this is the idea of versatility. And what I think is really interesting about your point is, a lot of people would say a Ferrari is fast because it has a big engine. But it's not just because of the engine, and it's not just the speed that matters. It's the maneuverability and the agility. So, there's a lot of things that go into that. The engine, the tires, suspension, the exhaust system, the transmission. Well, it's the same thing with the boot. What I do in a power strap can make a huge difference in how it feels to you and you just illustrated that. So that's where people start mixing and matching and building their own little kits. I walked you out in the warehouse and you saw the boots that we're repairing right now.
Yep.
Well, a lot of those boots are from 2017, and they come back, and one of the coolest things to do is just look at what a boot looks like after 3 years of use and what people have done to it to customize it. The first thing you notice is all sorts of iterations of power straps or no power strap at all. The second thing you notice is how they had to adjust the shell by molding it out or something. So it's an indication of fit. And then the third thing is all the, you might see shims and pads in the liners and around the front of the boot. So I like going back there and just hanging out and seeing what is it that is really going on. What does a boot look like after 3 years? And we can talk about that more, but I'm glad you guys walked back there with me, because that's a real view into what we do here and how we think about what we do in general. So I'm really stoked that you like the XT, because it is a few of the people that I really consider very thoughtful about what makes a boot feel the way it does, how it skis everything else, and who can actually articulate that, have been really really impressed with the boot. And that makes me proud. That makes me really happy that we actually did something. I really like the boot. It's all I've been skiing on piste at the ski areas. That's all I've been skiing on. So when you talk about the one boot, one world kind of idea, that could be my boot. the limitations start coming in when you start talking about binding systems. And binding systems are a really important and real thing to consider in your system. Really important.
Well, that brings up actually a really interesting point, because I think one of the biggest points of confusion for consumers in the ski boot industry right now is binding and boot compatibility. And we're seeing all these different sole norms and all different sorts of wild bindings. I know you guys have seen and adjusted to that with the Solomon Shift, for example. But how do you see overcoming this? Is it purely a consumer education issue, or are there other aspects to it as well?
That's a great question, and I didn't mean to stutter into my response to you, but the first thing is actually vendor education, manufacturer education, because until we won't be able to push out a good, solid message and advice to the consumer until we've all agreed on what we're doing as manufacturers. And it needs to be a higher level of understanding about this is about compatibility. It's not a competitive discussion. So the first thing I would say is compatibility of the boot binding compatibility is your number one priority when you're picking a boot. Just check that off the list first. Does this boot work in this binding? Which leads us to the question, how do I know? Well, we have standards and norms that should define that very clearly. A touring boot does not work in a pure play alpine binding because there's a different configuration to the sole. The toe has more lift to it. It has a very high friction rubber sole on it, which it's too high a coefficient of friction for releasability out of a lot of alpine bindings. This was all pretty clear and pretty black and white at one point. And then came backcountry skiing and cool innovation. Let's just be honest. This is what moves us forward. But we have to do it thoughtfully so we don't confuse or even put our consumers at risk here. So simply put, and I'll try to do it in the simplest way I can, because your local dealer, for sure, if you're buying online, this should be defined. It's noted in every product now. You're going to be dealing with an alpine norm or or a touring norm, let's call it. Alpine norm or touring norm. An alpine boot is an alpine norm. It's a very flat-looking sole. It has a very unique configuration that is designed with anti-friction plates or pads in the bottom to help facilitate release out of an alpine binding, and there's no tech fitting in the heel. It's not great to walk around in, and it is not necessarily the boot that you would necessarily backcountry ski in. But where it starts to get confusing is now we see those boots with tech fittings in them, and crossover norms like grip walk or walk to ride. These are really innovative norms and designs. But as everybody tries to line up boots manufacturers and binding manufacturers, we start to find some disconnections. So you asked about the Solomon Shift. The Solomon Shift is, for those of you who don't know, is a convertible binding. It can go from a textile touring binding for touring and going uphill to basically a cage style alpine toe configuration for skiing downhill, which should give you fully independent toe and heel release in the downhill mode where the most security is important. The confusion for some of our boots this last year was really not warranted because we meet the standard that the binding was made to, which is the touring norm. And actually that boot can work with both norms, that binding, excuse me. So if I have a 9523 touring boot and I can use that in a shift binding, I can use that in a marker kingpin, and then a number of other bindings out there. The limitations going back the other way into touring bindings is much less significant, because if it has tech fittings in the heel and toe, it'll probably it'll jam it in there. We've also seen a lot of people, sorry friends, but some of them are workers, some of them are friends, that have taken totally knowingly and willingly a pure play alpine touring boot and jammed it in a pure play alpine binding. and said, I'm fine with this because I know exactly what I'm doing and I know how to adjust the toe height. And now you look at the latest introduction of the Duke. Mark has been really progressive. Solomon has been really progressive. I mean, these are some of the best binding manufacturers in the world for sure. One thing is that,
And just real quick, when we talk about Marker Duke, you're talking about the new Duke
yes,
BT.
the new Duke. Yes, thank
that
you.
it will be available next fall.
Year. Yes. Sorry. Oh
Yep.
man, I probably let the cat out of the bag. Well, you guys are gonna hear about this sooner or later.
We had a podcast about it weeks ago.
Stick to stick to Blister, and you'll know more than anybody before they know it. So that's correct. And so clearly, this is an area where there is a lot of innovation going on and some confusion. My stance on the whole thing is stick to the norms. Everybody stick to the norm. Whether you're a manufacturer, follow the norms of any component. If it has to interface with another one, we have to have a universal language, which is international. The ISO norm is the definitive guideline, and they don't cross over very well. Now we have more options so we have to even be more discriminating and careful about what we're doing. The last part about that, which is always very interesting, is if, as you know, not to get too tech weenie on you, and just stop me if I'm going there, but there's a number of different styles of tech fitting, the toe specifically. We use Dynafit tech fittings, which we think are the best in the world. They make the bindings, they have the track record, and so that part should fit in the binding better than one because it was made by them. They make a standard binding and a quick step in, standard insert and a quick step in insert. I think that there was some concern over the quick step in insert because it actually has a little raised area that it helps you guide into a pen style, pure play pen style binding that would actually come in contact with the rollers as you were laterally releasing out of a more traditional alpine toe, and the Shift has that. That said, based on all the research from the experts and the independent testing groups, there was no issue with that. There is always some commercial components to this and competitive elements, which I really try to stay completely out of. And that's why I always go back to the norms and what is the standards we should be making to, building our products to, and communicating to the consumers. So I think that is more or less sorted out. It was actually kind of unique, the controversy to the U.S., interestingly enough, because the Europeans, hate to say it to all of us North Americans, but they're way ahead of us in some of this understanding, and they build systems, they understand that interface, and maybe the average skier there has a little more knowledge, maybe not, but the point is that we're talking to so many new school, backcountry, side country, big mountain free riders that there needs to be a whole new level of education and information available. And right now, look, most of the consumers out there are getting it from you guys, or getting it from media, or some of the favorite blog sites out there. It needs to be printed in the boot now. It needs to be stamped on the sole, which it is, and it needs to be in every kind of collateral. It's really a public service announcement more than, and for sure the retailers are the front lines for that, whether they're online retailers or brick and mortar retailers. So the other thing I'll tell you is I'm never convinced of anything or believe it until I see it with my own eyes and feel it with my own skis or bindings. So immediately upon the introduction, the Solomon guys were gracious enough to let me take out a pair and test them with our boots. And I ran them through their paces as on the bench as well as on the snow. And then I gave them to some of our favorite critics like Lou Dawson, who gets in there pretty deep. Yes. And he's really focused on one very narrow area of products and skiing, unlike you guys. But I look at the different experts out there and try to collect the varying opinions, but then we have to just kind of come to a point where we all agree that this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. SIA is doing a lot of work on trying through the ski mechanics workshops to try to educate everybody on the changes that we're witnessing now, because it's really quite big when you think about it. The guy on the bench in a back shop of a specialty ski shop, those guys are putting together some really unique systems now, and they need to know a lot more than they used to need to know about what compatibility is. Yeah, they've been on a run since twin tip skis were introduced, and that job became a lot more complicated and a lot more subjective. So luckily we are moving in the right direction to bring a lot more clarity to that. But I think it is the responsibility of the manufacturers to propagate that information, and for the consumers to seek it out, and for the retailers to make it as available to everybody.
We've talked about the Mistral XT a little bit, but let's talk about the Mistral RS. Over the past few years, this boot has, well, not even over the past few years. I mean, the Mistral series has been one of the most popular touring boots in the world for a long time. And with the addition of the new design RS to the line, I think that boot has been exploding. I mean, we see it everywhere. How has the popularity of that boot kind of driven your direction in the line?
That's a leading question, and I guess that's what you're supposed to be doing. It's a perfect question, actually. Following the sport, not just our boot line, we see what people are doing with our boots. We see where they want to go, and we see what they want to use their product, our boots on, their systems. So it brings us back to an interesting point where we were a number of years ago when we introduced the Freedom family of boots. And you might even wonder what's going on with the Freedom family. It kind of went away. So I think it's important to talk about all of this in context. The first thing that we predict, looking at trend lines, is that people are going to do more and more alpine style, more aggressive skiing on AT setups, what we classically define as AT setups, even though the parameters of that have been widened quite a bit. They're going to need more boot to keep doing that. They're putting him on bigger skis, and now they're using bigger bindings. So everything's gotten clicked up a couple of notches here. The XT is a great answer to what we think is the next step above the RS. And as you've mentioned, both RS and XT have relevancy right next to each other. What goes beyond that is I'm really interested to see what happens with the sole norms and how they shake out, and what's going on in the binding world. The Freedom family boots was really pretty revolutionary. I can say that because we didn't really see a boot that was that had that, at that time, that blend of uphill features, backcountry features, as well as alpine skiing characteristics. And the way we did that primarily was through overlap cuff, more traditional 3 or 4 buckle configurations, and an alpine or interchangeable sole system. Well, the interchangeable sole became the point of discussion because we saw grip walk, we saw walk to ride. I have those terms right. Yep. And what ensued was confusion, and these were really brand dominated. This is our system, this is their system, and everybody started jockeying position, not as in the sport sense, but in the brand sense. We love the Freedom family, and there are so many Freedoms out there. We're still selling tons of soles for them. I'll just say it like this. We have not walked away from that category by any means, but sometimes it's good to wait and listen and look and see what is it really that we would like to put out there. A Freedom that's 1,520 grams that skis like a real alpine boot with grip walk, that could be one direction that we consider, because obviously that's what is going, the trend lines, where the consumers are going. We also see a lot of alpine companies coming in. That's the most noticeable change into the market. In alpine touring, we're the number one brand. My philosophy as a CEO is, if we're not in the top 3 brands in a certain space, we either need to be, or we need to seriously figure out why we're not. That's when I can measure success a lot of different ways, but one is by consumer acceptance and where you see our boots, who's using them. 2 is just purely the market share numbers and how many boots we sell versus our competitors. And 3 is really, what is the people that are on the very edge, the leading edge of our sport, that are doing things that people haven't thought about yet, and that a lot of that's happening in the backcountry, I think, and on big mountains somewhere. So we see the need for that boot. We also, and then an extension of that, but in that general briefing of what it could look like, I would say that there's other things that are really important to us right now. For example, we would like to make boots out of Peebacks are new. We would like to make boots out of material that's made from the castor bean, that's based on a total sustainability, that actually props up an economy of farmers in India that have figured out, through a lot of really interesting work, that it's really not just about ski boots. It's a much bigger discussion about how do we bring sustainable farming to a country that is undergoing a lot of really serious climate issues, like the rest of the world. And through that initiative, the Pragati initiative is what it's called, Peebacks Are New came forth, which is about as cool a thing as, if I tell you that the Mistral, I tell you all the great things about it, and I say, and that's made out of plant oil. That's pretty compelling.
It's pretty cool.
So I have a dream of that. Like, I would like to be able to say, no, our boots ski like crazy, but they're based on a sustainable production plan and supply chain of materials, and you can feel really good about that. And we're dragging our suppliers along with us. People who make liners and soles and buckles, it's harder for them for sure. But if it's all the boot, great. If it's part of the boot, let's do what we can do. And it's also a statement about what's important to the world right now, especially snow sports. We won't need any of this stuff
right.
If we don't have a place to use it. So I have a lot of really great ideas. We do, I say, and some are ideas, some are strategies, some are really just visions of what the future could look like. I think I'm getting philosophical on you. I'll say that for the end. But we need to think about the next generation. We need to think about the world and sustainability. We need to think about access to snow sports, because these are all really important things, not only because of the viability of the sport as a business, but I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the impact that we have on the world, and the legacy of a brand like Scarpa. That should be part of it. It absolutely has to be part of it. So we want to do good things all the way around. But I would hesitate to tell you too much more, because at some point I'm probably saying things I should keep secret for a while. But we have a lot of we're looking out at all. We try to look out 2 or 3 seasons at all times, because it's like that old saying in hockey, if you're looking at where the puck is now, you've got it all wrong. You have to think about, where is it going to be? And that's a big part of my job and the design team in Italy. It's like, where's the puck going to be in 3 years? It's going to be quite different from where it is today. If you think about where we were 3 years ago, a lot of changes, and good changes for the most part. If I think about the big tipping points and events that change skiing, snow sports, but particularly skiing in this case, I can say that when we introduced shaped skis, that was really a game changer. The Marker Duke was a game changer. The plastic Telemark were game changers. All of these things were, the whole thing started going a different direction. The whole sport and the whole mentality about what's possible. That's where I like to. That's where I like to play out there, and that's why I work for Scarpa, because they're willing to do that. And let me do that as well in the big sandbox.
So I think then the obvious next question is, what do you see happening in the next 3 years?
Yeah, that is the obvious question. I see a number of things that are happening, and we've touched on a lot of them. I think that we'll see skimo. I'll take it by segment. All right, we're going to see skimo continue to grow, not just as a competitive sport, but as a great way to get exercise in the morning if you live in a ski town, or even if you don't. It's like running or riding your bike in the winter, but so much better because you can slide home when you're done. I think you'll continue to see that become more of a recreational sport. More in the backcountry realm and touring, we're going to see more and more people going into that mid category of touring because they just want to really tour. We say touring and we mean we're going to hike up something and ski down it. But if you think about the alternative cross-country skiing, more people were looking to get outdoors for fitness. Alpine touring is a much easier way to do that for a lot of those people. They may not know how to cross-country ski. They may not have they may not want to learn how to do that. They're used to alpine skiing. They can just get on an alpine touring setup. And I mean, how many of your friends that are good alpine skiers have you taken out and they're really nervous? And I said, look, just put the heel down and lock it in and alpine ski. And they're like, oh, it's the same. I'm like, yeah, that's why it's called alpine touring. We're on the alpine part now. But I see a lot more people coming into that. And then the crossover boot, the one boot, one world dream that we all think about. And it's not a dream, it's a reality. I'm going to Europe. I'm not carrying a quiver of gear. I'm carrying one pair of boots, and I want to be able to tour, walk, do a hut trip, free ride in real free ride places where it's adult skiing. You know, I don't want a floppy touring boot and a wimpy touring ski. I need real setup for that. I think I think we're pulling most of our new consumers from Alpine. I really believe that. And then segments from all the other parts of the market. I see a lot of crossover skiers people crossing over from riders crossing over to skiing. It's because they realize, wow, you know, the independent foot action in the backcountry and not having to deal with split boards and trying a new thing. Like it's a big house. There's lots of rooms, you know. Go in every one of them, check it out, because there's really cool things waiting for you in there. From snowboarding to alpine touring to skimo. Try something new this year. If you want my advice, do something you haven't done this year, and we'll help you make it possible. We're putting demos out all over the place. The shops love this discussion. Just walk in and say, I want to try something new, and see what they like a good Italian restaurant. You don't look at a menu. They tell you what you're having for dinner. This is what we're serving, and it'll be good. So I think that we're going to see more young people coming into it, which is really important. I'm really concerned about the access because alpine skiing is cost prohibitive to too many people. I grew up in a family, in a neighborhood, in an economy, in a city, Denver, that not many kids skied because they just couldn't afford it. I was really lucky. I had a family friend that took me. Then I went to a school that had a ski club, and then I learned how to ride the Eskimo ski train. I did it all, and whatever it took, I was going to try to get up there and ski. I skied at Bertha Pass. I skied at Eldora. The mega resort is not our friend when we're trying to teach our kids how to ski. Those little ski hills that's the magic, you know. That's where you could still, you know, have a day with the family, and we need to think a lot about that, and just access to product as well. More and more women more and more people from different backgrounds. We're going to see all of that. We see most of the diversity in snow sports is coming from the snowboard side of the business. And we're seeing more and more really awesome kind of migration into the backcountry. There's a real need for people to get into nature right now, and that's something you're not going to find in mechanized skiing. So this idea of being able to just put on some gear and go out and slide around, that's awesome. If you go up to Caribou or go up to the uphill at Eldora in the morning, it's pretty cool who you're going to see up there. And look at the areas in Colorado that are offering uphill now. It's pretty significant in areas we never thought would think that was even a good idea. I remember when there were ski areas that wouldn't let you telemark. They wouldn't let you telemark on the ski hill because they didn't understand it. Uphill wasn't that different, but they've been much faster to adopt. And I think mostly because that's what their customers want them to do. And that most people don't do things unless they actually feel really compelled through some important action. And when your customers tell you they want you to do something, it's worth listening to that. And ski resorts became so much more than snow sports, and I think getting back to kind of some of this core, the idea of hiking uphill, just being able to how you do it, how do climbing skins work? These are enigmas to a lot of people it's pretty fun to take them out and show them. So I said try something new this year. Teach somebody something new also, and then you will have fulfilled your really important roles as a member of the snow sports community, I think. And give good feedback to the people that make your gear. We want to hear what you think. We really want to hear what you think, because that's how we make ourselves better and how we improve things in our products. The users are the kings and queens of our world, I think that's how we should be, consumer centric.
So we recently did a epic 3-part podcast with Matt Manzer from Atomic. It was over 3 hours long of every single possible thing you could want to know about alpine ski boots. And we had almost an entire hour devoted specifically to plastics. And I know we touched on this earlier with the carbon infused Grilamid and some of the castor bean oil plastics as well. But I wanted to give you a chance maybe to just talk about the different plastics used in the line and where you might use one plastic or another for a specific performance, for example.
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, materials are really everything. It's a huge part of the technology and the technological advancements that we have. And it's not just plastics, it's carbon too. We can't forget carbon because we integrate them in different ways. So let's just start with the basic choices of menus of plastics that we have. There's polyurethane, the standard heavy plastics that you would use for most alpine rental boots, for example. Pick up a pair of rental boots and you'll see one of the first most noticeable things. It's really heavy. It also isn't particularly strong, so you have to make the boot with a thicker wall. But it's easy to work with and it's inexpensive. So perfect for a rental boot. We don't use polyurethane for the most part. It doesn't really fit into our world, but it's when used well in a good design, totally functional. And you see that on the high end of racing boots as well, where weight's not a big factor, stiffness is. Then we move into more of and there's lots of variations on this. So let me speak specifically to what we're doing. Then we move into the family of P-backs, which is a wholly different kind of material. It's an elastomer that has qualities that you'll never get out of polyurethane. First of all, it's much stronger. You can use the material with much thinner wall thicknesses. It's much more durable and flexible in a much greater range of temperatures. So if you take a boot to Denali, it's minus 40. Minus 40C and minus 40F are the same exact point. A lot of polyurethane boots could crack very easily in those conditions. P-Bax is known not just for in the sports industry. It's used for the automobile industry, mostly high-end cars, bumpers, for example, so that if you tap into something in the cold day, it doesn't blow the bumper up. So P-Bax is our main go-to material and has been for years. In 2007, we introduced P-Bax R New. The supplier, Arkema, did, and so that's been on the palette since then. And we use these selectively. Then we started talking about, and we can blend P-Bax to any stiffness level we want to. So there's the raw material and then the chemistry you use to create a different stiffness. So we can, it's chemistry basically. It's how much of different parts of that recipe do we put in.
Well, and from a performance or a materials perspective, how does the traditional P-Bax differ from the recycled or the castor bean oil, the RNU?
It's very similar. We're working right now. It's very similar to regular P-Bax. In fact, we don't see a ton of reasons why we should be using anything but P-Bax RNU. There was a time when we weren't able to make RNU as stiff as we could regular P-Bax, but we've solved a lot of those problems, and we've solved them in two ways: through chemistry within P-Bax, and then adding another material, Grilamid. So we kept kind of turning up the volume. Grilamid is a material that is much stiffer, as most of us have come to know it. It tends to be a little more brittle, but it still has the technical term ductility that's totally appropriate for a touring boot. So, and we test all of this in a laboratory. So when I say brittle, I mean at minus 30, a boot that's been refrigerated at minus 30, dropping a steel rod on it from 3 meters high, and polyurethane shatters. P-Bax, you might punch a hole in it. It's pretty graphic, the differences. Grilamid is where we were really able to start. That was a big step for us because we could start making boots stiffer without adding more material or supplementing structural members like I-beam construction. And so you can do it through materials and construction design, and we're trying to do both. The goal is to make the boot as thin-walled as possible wherever possible, but then buttress it up when you need more structure. The ribbing on a cuff is a great example. If you look at the structure of that, it has basically I-beams kind of built into it. So where you get to a stress riser, a point where there's a lot of focus, concentration of stress, you can buttress that up and back it up with an I-beam or thicker material, things like that. So Grilamid, big step forward for us. And then we wanted more, of course, because we always want more. And we were finding a couple interesting things. A side story here, we were using more and more carbon, but carbon has a really unique set of characteristics. It's not particularly user-friendly as from a skier experience. It tends to be very stiff, and it doesn't have any kind of progressive flex to it. It also is pretty fragile. And so we use it in our Skimo boots, in the lightest weight boots. Some of those boots are $1,400. That's talking about cost prohibitive. But when we started working with Grilamid and the idea of why can't we start blending materials, and so the Grilamid LFT, long fiber technology, was born, which is when you see the two-tone look of the Mistral A family, of the Mistral RS and the JRS, the black back half of the boot. So a lot of the stress riser and inputting the energy into a ski comes through the back half of the boot. And so we initiate the turn, we finish the turn on the front of the boot, we finish the turn on the back. But when you hear people saying, wow, I really got in the back seat, when they're making references to when I lost control of my stuff, it's a lot of times I wasn't on top of my ski. I lost it laterally, I went in the back seat or something like that. So we were trying to make cuffs stiffer. All of this was trying to match ski width increments. Because when we were skiing on a ski that was 80 under waist, you could do just about anything there. But now we're talking about skis that are 115, 120, some of those. And then depending on how big the person is and what kind of kit they're carrying in their pack, you can be talking about a 250-pound person with fully equipped, and then you do the force multiplier after they huck a cliff, you are spiking into the thousands of pounds of force load.
Which is simply because of the longer lever arm created by the wider ski, right?
And exactly. And the fact that we're cranking them now to 12 and 14. I mean, every system's got a point of failure, and where that is going to be at the weak point. The boots are the only thing that really move around. Like, we don't expect our ski to change flex. It is what it is. The bindings are pretty set. The boot, we expect to be able to walk around in it, to release the cuff, to fix the cuff, to do all those things. A lot of moving parts that have to lock down in that moment. So there's a lot more going on there. But sticking to the materials, and then we started adding carbon. So if you look at the F1 is a really great example. So it has a carbon core. The Freedom had a carbon core. So basically we're over injecting on a kind of an inner skeletal system, if you will, of carbon. We're injecting the rest of the boot around that, and it's easy to illustrate, but I won't show you now because nobody else can see it. But if you look closely at the side, around the heel of the F1, you see those windows, the black showing through?
Yep.
That's carbon.
Okay.
So imagine that there's a stirrup inside there that's carbon. The place where you're going to see the most, the stress risers and the loss of energy is in that hinge on the cuff to the foot of the boot. So that's where things start really flexing out. If you look at your boot on a carpet test, you step into your skis, you lock your boot in and you drive really hard forward, you'll notice the cuff will kind of try to expand laterally out because the energy has to go somewhere, especially when you're on dry land. You're not getting any of that absorption through the terrain or anything like that. So that's how far we've gone so far. Of course, pure carbon, but that's not practical for most backcountry skiers. We're using carbon in a lot of different ways to address stress riser and enhance certain areas of the boot that need to be, I call it, being buttressed up, reinforced, or to areas where we see the energy or the transmission of power where we see power not being transmitted but absorbed into the boot. So those are the areas we've learned to focus on. And then there's this idea of we've got 5-6 different materials and how we use them in conjunction with each other. So most of our boots have, when you look at the description of the material, there's going to be 3 different materials. The shell, which we call the scafo, the foot part of the boot, the cuff, and the tongue. And you'll find in many of the newer boots, we've got Grillimid, like the Mistral family, or we'll use the XT as an example. Grillimid LFT, Grillimid on the...
in the LFT long fiber technology.
Yeah, technology, yep. Sorry, I'm using our terminology. Grillimid and P-backs. And so tongues are a lot of times P-backs because they really get a lot of flexing, and that allows that kind of progressive flex into the boot.
So with the XT, I'm looking at it right now on the wall, so this is how I know this, or know to ask. The P-backs is going to be the gray plastic.
That is Grillimid. So you've got LFT in the back, Grillimid in the front.
So the black Grillimid is the LFT Grillimid.
Correct, yeah.
Then the rest of the shoe or the clog, or I can't remember the term.
Scafo.
Scafo.
Very good.
Is the gray Grillimid.
That's right.
Okay. And then which part of the boot is P-backs then?
The tongue. So
Okay.
In that particular case, we wanted stiff all the way around.
Yep.
And to give you, again, sorry your listeners can't hear this, but
if you're listening, go to YouTube and you can check out the Scafo that I'm holding now.
That's right.
From
and if you look
Mistral
inside,
RS.
That's a Mistral RS, and you can see when you look inside that there are distinctly 2 different parts that come together. This is
the black and the white.
Right,
Yeah.
and this is what it looks like before we do the second injection. So you've got the forefoot, in this case, Grilamid. The back end, the chassis end of the Scafo is Grilamid long fiber technology, LFT, the stiffest material we're using in our boots right now. And then Grilamid cuff Pebax tongue. I think I got that right.
It's a lot of materials.
It is. You know, I feel a little, after all the jobs I've had, this was what I would know best of all. And now I could tell you a lot more about other things you don't want to hear about. But luckily, I'm surrounded by all these really awesome and smart people who can help me keep on track here. But, you know, I still spend a lot of time around what does the boot feel like. And feeling is really where I start the discussion. We get so technical so fast, and that's why I keep telling people, okay, do your homework and all that, but just go out and ski the boot. Just try it, because the way it feels, don't let anybody convince you off the magazine reviews or the technology. Go for the feeling and the comfort. So,
and also skiing is just more fun than
way
sitting
more
in a shop or reading a magazine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the material discussion goes hand in hand. What are we going to make it out of? And then how are we going to make it? The design itself. So these subtle details of where we put a little extra material, the radius of certain turns, those are all really important to the function of the boot and actually the durability of the boot. And I can use a great case study that we're dealing with right now is the Fall 17 Mistral RS and Mistral recall. And the simple truth is that through a very small amount of material and a simple radius change, a radius is a common stress riser, we were able to fix the problem very easily, very quickly, and we did it in Fall 18. What we didn't know is, what we anticipated is that people will ski our boots forever, which they do. Watching the return rates after so many subsequent seasons, I decided we can't, look, we're really committed to our consumer. We are out there too. Like, it's one thing if your boot breaks and you're skiing, Breckenridge for the afternoon. So you just limp down to the shop or hit the bar or whatever. But when you're on a week-long trip in Canada or out on the Kilton Glacier or Baffin Island or wherever the crazy places that our friends and customers go, and your boot breaks, your ski breaks, your binding fails, you're effed. And we all know it. And because most of us have been there, right? And I take that so seriously. And I can't tell you how important it is to us to stand behind our products, be responsible. So when we saw the breakage rate going up over a pretty long period of time, we made the decision that we should replace the Scafo, the foot of all those boots, which you got to see because I wanted you to see what it really looks like to do that for us. That's thousands of boots, lots of money, lots of time, but all worth it because I know that once we do that, everyone's boots will be good. So if anybody out there that has a Fall 17 Mistral RS or Mistral, or that you're not sure what generation it is, please go to the Scarpa website, and you can find very clear instructions on how to identify the generation, the year of your boot, and then what to do if you do have a Fall 17 boot. If you send it in, we'll pay the freight both ways. We'll replace the feet, so you effectively have brand new boots from the ankle down, I guess, and send them back to you as quickly as possible. And we will do that all as at your convenience. But we want you to do it as soon as possible so we can get your boots good to go and not have any doubt. By the way, we've replaced the Scafos on many, many boots so far. And the amount of boots that we found broken is minimal, beyond minimal. So there's a lot of people that might second guess the decision to do that, but here's the bottom line. One pair of broken boots is one pair too many. Unfortunately, in the commercial industrial world that we live in, things will break. We've never made a product that somebody couldn't break. It's not always, many times it's like a little bit of a combination of that probably wasn't the right boot for that cliff jump or whatever. Right tool for the right job. Being truthful about what's really going on and what you're trying to do with your products. And then we have a file we call JSA, just skiing along. I don't know how my broke in half. I was just skiing along, or the tip fell off my ski or whatever. Anybody in the industry knows the JSA story. So in this case, really take the time to check out your boots and get them into us so we can do the right thing for you, and you'll be all set.
And we'll also include a link in the show notes of this podcast.
Perfect,
Anyone who has those boots can go check out the Scarpa website and take the proper steps.
We're all here to help you sort it out and get you back on the road as quick as possible.
Great. So I think everyone who's listened to this podcast so far really is chomping at the bit as much as I am to see what's wrapped up in that boot up there.
Well, I wanted to say a couple things about that. It is holiday, as we noted earlier, and so I think that this is appropriate time. I believe, you got to give love to get love. So you gave us love coming here, and I want to give you a little love by showing you kind of what's headed your way. I would also like to offer you the hot off the press Fall 2000 workbook, which has all the new product with some detailed information in it.
Ooh, I love catalogs.
if you're not in the trade, this is how it kind of works. First, we introduce to the trade, and we get the retailers and the media going, and then their job is to roll it out to you guys. So we're starting to build that ramp right now, and what I would like to. I guess the moment of truth here is that I wanted to offer this gift up as a preview into what's coming for next fall. It is a boot that will speak to some of the areas we were thinking about in the trends of where we see that kind of mid-weight, light to mid-weight touring person going. And my colleague Melanie is much better at Christmas than I am, so she took the time to wrap this up for you. And,
so for those of you listening who aren't on YouTube, it is a gift-wrapped ski boot that Kim is giving me right now. And I wish all of my Christmas presents were wrapped like this.
If it doesn't look like that or isn't 180 centimeters long and really skinny,
why would you even want it?
Leave it for last, yeah.
So may I?
Please, I will. I'll tell you about it.
It's very light. I'll tell you that much right now.
Super light.
Yeah.
It's on the light side.
I think I actually just saw it in the catalog before I opened it up. All right. So this looks to be a light version of the F1.
That's exactly right. This is called the F1 LT. It is a boot that will be replacing the Alien RS. So if you love the Alien RS, you better go grab another pair right now because they're going away. The idea of this boot is continuing to expand on that light touring, that mid-range touring. It has some red sparkles on it. That's really nice.
I wonder where those came from.
So this is a boot that is 990 grams. It is rated at a 95 flex, I think is where we ended up with that. It has a little more traditional closure than the Alien RS did. So it's going to be, and as you noted, the closure system on the cuff is very impactful on the skiability of the boot and the flex of the boot. This is a boot designed for people that are using the RS probably currently well beyond the design parameters of that boot. I know you guys. I see you out there every weekend, so don't try to hide from me. And half of you are my friends. So this is the boot I thought would be a nice supplement to your Alien or to your Alien RS. It is a little bit wider last. It's a 100 millimeter last, so it's going to be a little more touring comfort. Has a spoiler option, double power straps. It's pretty nice. And early reviews are, people are raving about it. So I think it's a bridging boot, as I like to say. Something between the F1 and the Alien RS or the Alien family, but something that will definitely be that boot for somebody who wants to do midweight backcountry and still ski up the resort in the morning for fitness. It's a perfect choice for that. I think you'll be really happy with it. And was there something else I was supposed to tell you about that?
It looks really cool. That's one thing I would say. The black and orange is pretty sweet.
It's pretty cool. I think that is, in terms of where I see it, this is really what people are looking for. And we do see a lot of broken Skimo boots. And it's exactly what I just said. I wasn't joking. People are going way beyond what they were designed for. And so we wanted to, instead of, complaining about that, it's better as a parent, it's better to redirect than to try to change behavior. So I'm saying this is a better boot for you guys and get them interested in this direction. But I ski this boot. I've skied it on everything that I skied in F1 and sometimes my Mistrales are on, and you'll be surprised. And I think I got the numbers wrong. It's 100. We're ranking it at 100 flex. We're rating it 1 to 100 in flex, and it's a 99 millimeter last. I think I got those two numbers somehow confused. But it's out being tested extensively right now all over the world. It will be available for Sam to ride it, I think, in about a month at the OR show and on Snow Demo, unless he's made arrangements with some of my colleagues to do that earlier. And for those of you that are in the consumer world, you'll see this boot showing up in early fall 20, in September, something like that. But stay tuned. You'll see a lot more once Lou Dawson sees it, and a lot of other people that will talk about this. I'm sure you'll see a lot more reports on the boot from those guys, which are probably better.
I am very excited to check this out. This thing looks pretty rad. And thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. I don't think there's a more exciting way we could probably end this podcast, but this was excellent. I can't wait to get more time in the XT. For those listening, the full review of the Mistral XT, probably we're looking at still a few weeks. I want to get a handful more days in there and really make sure that we're getting everything that we need to in that review. But that'll be out soon, and then we're going to be getting time on this F1 LT as soon as we can as well. And really, we're just excited to go skiing. It's full on winter here in Colorado.
I would recommend the next time we do this that we're outside and use it. So thanks again. I really appreciate you guys coming in and spending time with us. And it really is great to talk about the things that I love to do. And if you're new to Scarpa, as a backcountry skier, I don't want to sound weird here, but that's hard to imagine. But if you are new to Scarpa, check us out. There are a lot of cool things that we do in terms of footwear, but I'm sure that within our collection you'll find something that will serve your needs no matter what kind of an outdoor athlete you are. And I'm very, very excited to get you in particular out in the F1 LT. It won't be your XT, so we'll change it up a little bit, but this is on that other end of performance continuum. But I think it's going to be a great contribution, and that's really the word I like to use. If we introduce a new product, it should be a contribution to our sport, not just another introduction and more waste to put on the earth. So everything should matter. Every detail should count. So with that, keep the good work up that you guys are doing, because we get a lot of really important insight from that. And I could say in closing, your work makes our work easier and our final products better. So thanks for that collaboration.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thanks for your time today. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.